before the Aztecs and before the Maya. There were a culture who are referred to as the Olmecs. There are faces hidden inside the Olmec heads, not the ones you've seen in textbooks. Different faces, older faces carved by hands that predate the Olmec by centuries, then deliberately chiseled away and overwritten to make sure no one ever saw them again. In 2023, Dr. Cyphers, a veteran archaeologist with 30 years at San Lorenzo, ran high-resolution laser scans across all 17 colossal heads. The data penetrated beneath the known carved surfaces and exposed what 3,000 years of jungle rain and silence had kept hidden. A layer of original carvings underneath, showing different bone structures, different proportions, different people entirely. Someone carved a message into 50 tons of volcanic rock. Then the Olmec erased it. They chiseled away the original faces, sculpted their own on top. And when that still wasn't enough, they smashed the heads, gouged out the eyes, and buried the remains in ceremonial pits underground. Whatever dark secret was written inside those stone faces terrified them enough to demand 3 layers of silencing. For over 3,000 years, nobody questioned it. The impossible monuments. 17 massive stone heads sit scattered across the swampy lowlands of Veracruz and Tabasco, Mexico. They have been there for roughly 3,500 years. Each one weighs between 6 and 50 tons. Some stand 11 feet tall. They're carved from solid basalt, volcanic rock that rates 6 on the Mohs. Hardness scale harder than a steel knife blade with a level of precision that has no business existing in 1500 BCE. Not only are they a Mesoamerican civilization, but that it developed out of the indigenous cultures. Look at them closely. Broad noses with anatomical definition and natural proportions. Full lips curving with realistic fullness. Almond-shaped eyes with carved lids and subtle pupil indications achieved through careful surface variation. Ears with correct anatomical structure, some featuring intricately detailed earrings or earplugs. Elaborate headdresses, suggesting cloth, leather, and feathers, with chin straps indicating helmets or ceremonial headgear. And get this, every single face is different. These aren't generic religious icons, they're portraits. Specific individuals frozen in volcanic stone with disturbing accuracy. Whoever carved them worked from direct observation of real people, capturing features with artistic sophistication rivaling anything produced in ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. The Olmec civilization supposedly created them between 1500 and 400 BCE. That makes them Mesoamerica's oldest known major civilization, predating the Maya by centuries, the Aztecs by millennia. When these heads were being carved, the Trojan War hadn't happened yet. Homer wouldn't be born for another 700 years. The Greek alphabet didn't exist. Rome was nothing but empty hills. Stonehenge was already ancient and abandoned. The heads were discovered at 4 sites across the Olmec heartland. San Lorenzo holds 10. La Venta has 4. Tres Zapotes has 2. La Cobata has 1. The largest monument, one at San Lorenzo, weighs an estimated 50 tons. That's heavier than most adult humpback whales. Picture 8. Full-grown elephants compressed into a single carved face. They called them the Olmecs, and it means the rubber people, because a rubber-producing area. The first head was discovered in 1862 by a farmer clearing jungle near Tres Zapotes. He thought he'd found a massive iron kettle buried upside down. When archaeologists finally excavated it, decades later, a stone face stared back at them from the earth. Since then, every new discovery has deepened the mystery rather than solving it. Each head raises more questions than the last, and the biggest question has nothing to do with who they depict. Here's the catch. The basalt these heads are carved from doesn't exist anywhere near where they were found, not even close. The 60-mile problem. Dr. Jose Luis Rubalcaba, a geochemist at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, ran geochemical fingerprinting on samples from every head. Trace element compositions unique to specific volcanic sources when the coordinates came back pointing to Cerro Chintepec in the Tuxtla Mountains. He leaned back in his chair and said nothing for a long time. 60 miles. The stone came from 60 miles away. He ran the analysis 3 more times, certain the instruments were wrong. Same answer every time. 60 miles through dense tropical jungle seasonal swamps that turn paths into rivers and multiple water crossings with no natural force. No wheels existed in the pre-Columbian Americas. No horses, no oxen, no draft animals of any kind, just human muscle and plant fiber rope against 50 tons of volcanic rock. Researchers have tested conventional theories: log rollers, fiber ropes, coordinated pulling. In 1994, 80 workers successfully moved a 10-ton replica several miles over prepared ground. But 10 tons is the lightest actual Olmec head. The heaviest weighs 5 times more. And scaling up doesn't just mean more workers, it means exponentially more chaos. 500 to 1,000 people pulling in. Perfect synchronization. One mistimed pull and the stone tips crushes. Workers destroys months of effort. 15-foot wide path cleared through 60 miles of jungle that grows back in weeks. Hundreds of hardwood logs as rollers, constantly replaced. An entire workforce fed, housed, and commanded for months on end. Either the Olmec possess state-level organization and engineering, knowledge that shouldn't exist in 1500 BCE America, or someone helped them. Someone we haven't identified, but the transport mystery was about to become the least troubling question about these heads. They're most famous for is these huge, carved human heads, what the laser found. Here's where everything changes. Dr. Cyphers had spent 3 decades at San Lorenzo, 3 decades earning the right to run the most advanced scan ever, attempted on these monuments when the high-resolution laser imaging began. Rendering in 2023, she expected tool, mark documentation standard analysis, another data point. The first anomaly appeared within hours. She pulled her chair closer to the monitor, called over. 2 colleagues, nobody spoke. The scan wasn't showing a carved surface, it was showing layers, a palimpsest, a stone. Manuscript written, erased, and overwritten with the original text still visible underneath. Her hands were shaking when she picked up the phone to call the department chair. What the laser had exposed wasn't a carving technique, it was a cover-up, a 3,000-year-old cover-up executed in volcanic. Multiple layers of tool marks stacked on top of each other. Surfaces deliberately smoothed to erase earlier details. Headdresses recarved with completely different patterns. Facial features altered, noses reshaped, mouths modified. Entire expressions changed from whatever they originally depicted. Like discovering a famous painting was actually painted over an older unknown masterpiece, except this was carved into 50 tons of volcanic rock, and whoever overwrote it did so with the clear intention that no one would ever see the original again. The original faces weren't just different, they were unrecognizable. Different bone, structure, different proportions, different people entirely. Now pay attention to this part. The modifications showed different weathering patterns than the original surfaces beneath them. Weathering is nature's clock. Exposed basalt oxidizes, develops patina, accumulates microscopic biological growth at measurable rates. The reworked areas were newer, significantly newer. The original carvings underneath were older, possibly much older than the Olmec civilization itself. The weathering gap pointed to centuries of separation between the 2 carved layers, potentially longer, though precise dating of stone surfaces remains contested. The implications hit the team like a shockwave. These weren't Olmec creations. The Olmec found these heads already carved, already ancient, already carrying whatever identity or message their unknown creators had encoded into 50 tons of basalt. Then the Olmec modified them, chiseled away the original faces, sculpted new ones on top, claimed the monuments as their own, and buried whatever dark secret the originals contained. Cyphers' team worked through the night for 3 straight weeks. Every new scan confirmed the same thing. Head after head after head, the same layered pattern. Original carvings underneath Olmec modifications on top. This wasn't one anomaly, it was systematic. All 17 heads showed evidence of reworking. Whatever the Olmec were hiding, they did it across every single monument they possessed. And get this, the tool mark analysis made the whole thing even more unsettling. Dr. Kenneth Hirth, an archaeologist, specializing in Mesoamerican stone technology at Penn State, they are supposedly the first high civilization of Central America. Examine microscopic images of the carved surfaces. He set down the images, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes before responding. Some of these marks shouldn't exist with the tools available at the time. Certain areas showed broad percussion marks consistent with stone hammers, standard technique expected, but other areas showed fine controlled grooves resembling sawing or grinding with precision abrasives that don't match any known Stone Age technique in the archaeological record. 2 completely different levels of technology on the same surface, separated by the same weathering gap that distinguished the original carving from the Olmec modifications. The original builders used methods nobody can identify. The Olmec used cruder tools to overwrite them. The technology didn't advance, it degraded. Basalt is incredibly dense, heavy, and brutally resistant to shaping. You need something harder than it to carve it effectively. The conventional answer is jade, tools, and stone chisels worked over extended periods. That works in theory, but look at the actual detail on these heads. Eyes with carved lids, nostrils with anatomical definition, lips curving with natural fullness, ears with correct structure, headdresses with elaborate layered patterns, suggesting different materials all rendered in unyielding volcanic rock. Modern carvers working basalt use diamond-tipped power tools and pneumatic hammers to achieve this level of precision. Replicating it with stone implements would require thousands of hours per head using techniques we don't fully understand and cannot reliably reproduce today. That's not an exaggeration. That's the professional assessment of people who carve stone for a living. So let that sink in. The original builders, whoever they were, possessed superior technology to the Olmec who came after them. The civilization that inherited these heads couldn't match the craftsmanship of the civilization that made them. History is supposed to move forward. Tools get better techniques, improve knowledge accumulates, but the Olmec heads tell the opposite story. The older layer is more sophisticated than the newer one. The timeline runs backward. If mysteries like this keep you up at night, hit subscribe, because the question of who carved those original faces is about to collide with something the Olmec did that makes no sense at all. Unless they were terrified. The ghost civilization. So here's where it gets dark. If the Olmec didn't carve these heads from raw stone, if they discovered existing monuments and modified them, then the obvious question becomes, modified them from whom? We know who came before the Maya. We know who preceded the Aztecs. There are transitional sites, developmental stages, archaeological breadcrumbs showing gradual progress from simple to complex. For the Olmec, almost nothing. They appear in the archaeological record around 1500 BCE, already building monumental architecture, already organizing massive labor forces, already demonstrating capabilities that should have taken centuries to develop. Where's the learning curve? Where are the primitive early attempts, the failed experiments, the rough drafts that should precede masterwork? They don't exist. At least nothing anyone has found. And archaeologists have been looking for over a century. Every dig, every survey, every satellite scan of the Olmec heartland has failed to produce a clear developmental sequence. The heads appear in the record as if dropped there by something outside the normal flow of human progress. Fully formed, fully sophisticated, no rough draft preceding them. Here's the thing, this pattern of inheriting sacred objects appears elsewhere in Mesoamerica. The Maya built temples directly atop older structures, absorbing their sacred power. At Chichen Itza, the shadow of a feathered serpent slithers down the pyramid steps during equinox, a sophisticated astronomical effect built on foundations far older than the Maya themselves. The Aztecs hauled Toltec sculptures hundreds of miles to display in their capital, believing proximity to ancient sacred objects transferred divine authority. But here's the critical difference. We can identify those predecessors, name them, date them, trace their development through the record. For the Olmec's potential source culture, nothing. A ghost civilization sophisticated enough to carve 50-ton portrait heads in volcanic rock with techniques that challenge modern replication, then vanish so completely. We can't find their cities, their workshops, their burial sites. They're dead. Not a single potsherd, not one foundation stone, not a single grave, not a broken tool or discarded flake of basalt from the carving process. In over 160 years of professional archaeology in the Olmec heartland, not one artifact has been definitively attributed to a pre-Olmec culture capable of producing monumental sculpture. Ghosts who left behind 50-ton calling cards and nothing else. Now pay attention to this part. When a civilization builds monumental sculpture, it leaves a massive archaeological footprint. You need quarries, workshop areas covered in stone chips and broken tools, housing for the workforce, kiln storage pits, refuse dumps, latrines. You need supply chains, food production, water management, administrative centers to coordinate it all. And you need burial sites because people die during projects this massive. Falls crush limbs, exhaustion, the dead have to go somewhere. For the Olmec's potential source culture, we have none of this zero. Not a flake of quarry debris, not a single worker's campsite, not one skeleton with injuries consistent with heavy stone labor. A civilization capable of carving 50-ton portrait heads in volcanic basalt, one of the hardest stones on Earth, existed long enough to complete at least 17 monumental works of art, and then disappeared without leaving behind so much as a cooking fire. Either the Olmec developed impossible capabilities with unprecedented speed, or they inherited knowledge and monuments from cultures that have been completely erased from the archaeological record. Both options shatter our models of how civilization develops, but what the Olmec did to those inherited heads, that's what keeps researchers awake. The feathered serpent is a famous icon in Central America, Quetzalcoatl, who's the god of peace, the bringer of civilization, the ritual destruction. The Olmec didn't just display these inherited monuments, they tried to kill them. At San Lorenzo, several heads show deliberate defacement. And the pattern of destruction tells a story far more unsettling than simple political vandalism. Surfaces were systematically hammered with stone tools, but the damage wasn't random. Whoever did this understood exactly which features held power. They attacked the eyes first, gouged them, then the mouth obliterated, then the nose flattened. The sensory organs, the parts of a face that communicate identity, expression, intent, as if they were trying to blind, mute, and suffocate the stone itself, as if whatever was encoded in those original features could still see, still speak, still breathe. Think about that for a second. This wasn't a vandalism, this was surgery. Targeted, methodical, performed with specific knowledge of which features carried meaning. The left mostly intact. The ears damaged, but secondary. The chin straps and helmet details largely preserved, but the eyes, nose, and mouth annihilated. Every time. On every defaced head, the same sequence, the same targets, the same priorities. Whoever gave the order knew exactly what they were destroying and why. Some heads were toppled from their original positions with organized force, dragged face down across the ground, grinding the remaining features into the dirt. Not a quick act of rage. A sustained, coordinated campaign of obliteration requiring significant manpower and deliberate planning. These operations would have taken days. Teams of workers with stone hammers, ropes, and wooden levers, all directed at monuments their own ancestors had spent months transporting and modifying. The Olmec were destroying their own investment, their own sacred objects. Whatever drove them to do it outweighed the enormous cost of the monuments themselves. Then, and this is crucial, they were carefully buried. Not dumped, not abandoned, placed in prepared pits with evident care, arranged with structural precision, oriented in specific directions, filled with deliberate positioning that suggests ceremony, not disposal. Some pits contained offerings alongside the destroyed heads, as if the Olmec were apologizing to whatever spirit inhabited the stone. Even as they sealed it underground, you don't go through that kind of effort to dispose of garbage. You don't mobilize a workforce, dig ceremonial pits, arrange offerings, and orient massive stones in specific directions just to throw something away. You do it to contain something dangerous.
Political destruction is the standard explanation. New rulers erasing predecessors, sacred objects interred when ceremonial centers were abandoned.
And that does appear in later Mesoamerican cultures. But some researchers see something else entirely in the damage patterns, not political erasure, not abandonment, ritual termination. The deliberate ending of something powerful, something ancient, something that needed to be stopped, contained, sealed underground permanently. Whatever the original builders encoded in those faces, whatever message or power or identity was carved into the basalt before the Olmec ever touched it. The Olmec didn't just want to claim it. They wanted to end it. First, they overwrote the faces. When that wasn't enough, they destroyed them. When that still wasn't enough, they buried the remains in ceremonial pits and sealed them under tons of earth. 3 layers of silencing: overwrite, destroy, bury. Whatever secret those original faces carried demanded all 3. And here's the detail that haunts researchers most. The burial pits weren't hastily dug. They were engineered, carefully measured, some lined with clay. The heads placed inside with their destroyed faces pointing downward, pressed into the earth as if to ensure that whatever gaze those original eyes once held would never look upward again, never see the sky, never see the people walking above. Sealed in darkness permanently. You can see connections between them. And the later, Maya, that whole mystery of the Mayan calendar, worse than we thought. So here's where we land. 50 tons, 60 miles, 0 wheels, 0 animals, and yet someone did it 3,500 years ago. Someone with organizational capabilities matching civilizations that wouldn't emerge for another millennium. Someone with carving techniques we can't fully replicate, even with modern analysis. Someone who may have inherited these monuments from builders who vanished without leaving a single trace. No pottery, no foundations, no graves, no tools, nothing. The conventional model says civilizations develop linearly. Simple becomes complex. Hunter-gatherers become farmers. Farmers become villagers. Villagers become city builders, every step visible in the record like growth rings in a tree. The Olmec heads shatter that narrative completely. Either sophisticated engineering appeared suddenly without visible developmental stages, which requires explaining how that's even possible, or Mesoamerican civilization extends deeper in time with far greater complexity than any current model acknowledges. Advanced cultures rose and fell, leaving almost no trace. Knowledge cycled rather than accumulated. Civilizations reached extraordinary heights and were still erased so thoroughly that not even their names survived. We've barely scratched the surface of who was here before us. And the laser scans just prove that what lies beneath that surface is far more complex, far more disturbing, and far more deliberately hidden than anyone imagined. Dr. Cyphers put it simply in a recent interview. After 30 years at San Lorenzo, she thought she understood the Olmec. The scanning data proved she didn't. Nobody does. We've been asking the wrong question all along, she said. Not how they moved the heads. Who made them first? And what was written in those original faces that the Olmec were so desperate to erase? The 17 heads sit in museums across Mexico today. Climate-controlled rooms with soft lighting and informational plaques telling a neat conventional story. Tourists take selfies with them. School children file past on field trips. Nobody looks at those massive stone faces and thinks about what's underneath. Nobody reads the dark secret the lasers exposed, the older faces, the unknown builders, the systematic erasure, the ceremonial burial. The plaques don't mention any of it, but beneath those Olmec surfaces, the laser data tells a different story. Older faces, unknown builders, techniques that degrade rather than advance. A message carved into volcanic rock that someone spent centuries trying to silence through overriding destruction and burial. Every head a crime scene. Every modified surface evidence of a cover-up that lasted 3 millennia. 50-ton portraits transported through impossible terrain carved with unexplained precision by a civilization that left no other trace of its existence. Modified from older originals by a later culture that couldn't match the original craftsmanship, then systematically destroyed and buried with ceremonial care for reasons we may never fully understand. We solved the mystery of how. Massive labor forces, coordinated teams, sophisticated logistics, spanning months, engineering knowledge, more advanced than we ever credited to Stone Age Americans. But that solution cracked open something we weren't prepared for. A door we can't close, a question that demands an answer the archaeological establishment isn't ready to give. Who were the original builders? What happened to their civilization? And what dark secret was written inside those ancient stone faces that made them worth moving mountains to possess? Then worth 3 layers of silencing to bury forever.
Do you think the Olmec were trying to protect us from whatever was carved into those original faces? Or protect themselves? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more forbidden history, smash that like and subscribe. We're just getting started.